Hey, hello and welcome to this very new tutorial by Flomotion. And today it is getting hot because we are playing with fire inside of After Effects, of course. But this tutorial is not only dangerous, it's also a little bit advanced. So if you're completely new to After Effects, you may want to check out my other tutorials first. But for the rest of you who are still watching, let's just directly jump into After Effects.
And in here, let's build everything from scratch. So we start with a new composition. We click on composition, new composition, and we just call it our input. For the size, let's just stick with the default, which is full HD, and we click OK. And the reason why I called this input is because here I want to create the input of the logo or the letter or whatever you want to put in there that's later on going to burn. So I want to set this up so you can always go back into that input composition and switch that out to whatever you want and everything will update. So the keyword here is procedural. So let's just create a letter, and I chose that font because when the letter is burning now, we have like 3 different parts that we could use for our burn effect. Just make that a way smaller because the flame will be on top here later on. And we can position that in the middle by going to the align window and click on that line horizontally. And we are done. What I'm also going to do is I want to get out a ruler by hitting Ctrl R and just position it so that I later on have a visual reference, because everything that's on top of the ruler I want to burn, or the fire should come out here. So that's really everything we will do here. So let's pre-compose all of this. You can just hit Ctrl-Shift-C for pre-compose, or go to Layer, Pre-compose, or you can just take the input and move it over that new composition icon, and we call this one our source. And what we want to do in here is we want to create our flame shape. So this means I want to stretch out that top part and blur it so that we get like 3 streaks coming out of the top of this W. And to do that, I'm going to duplicate the input. Now I want to set the anchor point to the point where we had our ruler before. So let's check where it is. You can always do a right click and you see it's 682. So let's make the same in here. You can just bring out the ruler, right click on it and click 682. Okay, so now we want to bring the anchor point to that position. And we can do that with that pan behind tool. When we just click on it, we can move our anchor point. And if it doesn't snap to your ruler, you can always click on that snapping button here. But why have we done that? Because now we can scale it around that point. So if I'm hitting S for scale, I only want to stretch the height. Let's do this. So that looks pretty nice. So now I'm pre-composing this, call it stretch, and quickly mask this out by clicking on the rectangle tool. And we can give this a little bit of feathering by hitting F for feather and just type in like 2. So now let's add an adjustment layer by hitting Ctrl, Alt and Y. And this will be our blur, because we want to blur the top part of the flame a little bit. So we type in Gaussian blur and just blur our flame like 25. And again, I'm going to create a mask, and I'm duplicating the whole blur layer and just adjust the mask for the second one and blur it even more. Feather the mask until I have the base shape of my flame. Perfect. And now we're going to pre-compose our source. Again, let's drag it onto here and we call this our main fire. Now when I'm looking at this, let's just bring all of this a bit down. Just going into our source, bring this down. Okay. And remember, you could always switch out what is in our input. So for example, just duplicate this and take another letter. For example, this one is the O. So now we get something like this. So maybe let's just stick with the O for now and start creating our fire. And we want to create our fire look with just one effect, or let's say with one main effect. And this will be the fractal noise. So we just type in fractal, and there we have our fractal noise. Just drag and drop it onto our layer here. And now let's just do some tweaks. We bring up the contrast a lot. And now we want to scale this. So we go to the transform, disable the uniform scaling, and now we can just scale the width. We make that smaller, something like this, and scale it up until we have something that looks a little bit like fire. And when I'm playing this, you see that nothing is happening. That's because we also want to animate the flame going upwards. And we do that by the offset turbulence. Going to the beginning of our composition, click the offset turbulence, and at the end of our composition, I'm just bringing this down, because you see when I'm bringing the number down, our turbulence goes up. So, and I'm bringing this down a lot, like maybe minus 4000. That's really up to you how you want your fire to look. Just play this back and you can directly see what this will look like. And maybe let's make this even faster. So I'm going down to minus 5000 and I'm going to blending mode none to give it an even more contrast look. Great. Okay, so now let's work a little bit more on the look of the fire. When you watch a normal fire, and you can do a quick research on Google or YouTube, or just go outside, sit next to a bonfire and have a look, then you will see that the fire has more density close to where it's burning, and the further it goes up to the top, there will be more like separate chunks. So let's create the separate chunks. So I'm just duplicating the source, and let's set this to add. So nothing has happened here. So here, with that one, I want to create the top part, and this will be the bottom of the flame. So let's quickly mask that out. Let's say we want to have it until here, about something about here, where we have the dense fire, and the top part will be around here. Okay, bottom of our fire, top of our fire. So I want to keep that as it is, but now I want to create another layer with big chunks and use that as a matte. So let's just do that. Let's create a solid and make this big parts. Click OK. And I'm just copying the fractal noise onto the same layer. And now let's just work on the big parts. I want to bring out the contrast more and keep the scaling at its default. Maybe even go down with the brightness. So now we have this bigger parts going up. Perfect, exactly what we wanted. Now we want to use that because we have a black and white image, so a Luma image, use that as a Luma matte for our top layer. So just go to Luma matte. Now you see we have like bigger chunks that are coming up. So this starts looking really nice. So now let's get this to look like fire. So therefore we create a new adjustment layer, Control-Alt-Y, and call this our fire look. And for our fire look, we want to use two effects. First one is a vector blur, and the second one, you guessed it, is a glow. So let's just disable the glow and work on our vector blur. And I just want to bring it up like maybe till 20, and the smoothness to maybe something like 6.8, maybe even 6.9. For the glow, we want to take a threshold 4%, maybe. So that basically means we are going to glow everything. So if we go to 0, everything will glow, and the further we bring this up, the more it separates it to its brightness. But let's bring this really low so that we get a glow on nearly all of the parts of the fire. The radius is fine. Let's just bring down the intensity a little bit. And of course we need to change the colors. So we want to use A and B colors. For the A color, we now choose something reddish, and for the B color, more an orange tone. And let's play this back. Yes, now we really start to see some of that fire effect. But we're still not finished here, because I want to work a little bit more on the shape of the fire. So therefore, I'm going to bring out a new adjustment layer and call this our fire shape. Because I want this to be thinner at the top and maybe a little bit more stretched. So when I'm stretching out all of the top part, as everything is going in one constant speed, but I'm stretching out the top part, this will be a little bit faster over there. And I'm doing that with a mesh warp. So a mesh warp generates a grid, and you can just click on one of the grid points and distort it. And now, as I said, I want to stretch the top part up and also make the top part way thinner. Okay, after a little bit of tweaking, we got from this to this. And just a quick tip while we're at this stage, let's just go back to our source, go to our stretch layer, hit S for scale, and just bring this to like half a second, and then bring this back to where it was. And in our source layer, you will now see that this creates something like the flame coming up in the beginning. And in our main fire comp, this is what this looks like. It looks like the fire starts burning. Next, let's create some particles. So therefore, let's make a new solid, maybe just make it red. So we get like red particles that will be like flying sparks at the fire. And we take a particle system that's built in After Effects. So particle systems 2. And let's just solo this so that we see what this is doing. It bursts out a hell lot of particles. So let's just work on that. So the birth rate is way too much. Let's bring it down to 1. Have a look. Still way too much. 0.02. So for the longevity, let's just bring this a little bit down. So go to the producer and unsolo this. So just work a little bit on the position where the sparks should fly out. And this is about the size where our big chunks would start. And let's work on our radius. I'll just bring up the X to something like 36 and bring down the radius for the Y. Okay, next is the physics. Explosive looks really nice, but let's try something like direction. Yes, that starts to look nice, but of course we need to tweak that a little bit more. Let's work on the velocity, so let's make it a little slower, because they are actually floating in the wind. So for the gravity, we don't want to have gravity. As I said, they are floating in the wind. But we want to give them a little bit of an extra. Now you see that they are like sparks, like twisting, almost like fireflies. Let's make them fade in. The higher they fly, the more you can see them. And therefore, let's maybe just bring the producer a little bit more down. Make the birth color our reddish color and the death color something like our orange. And let's transfer them to screen. So now let's work on the look of the particles, and then we need to define an area where the particles will be visible. So again, let's do that with a glow. Let's just leave the threshold at about where it was, the radius, and bring up the intensity. Great, and now let's define an area where the particles will be. So we create an alpha matte for the particles. And of course, they should be somewhere where our flame is. So again, let's just take our source. Let me solo this. And that part should, of course, be where our particles are flying. So this is the main matte, but we want to extend it. And we can do that with a choker and just bring that to -100. So we have extended the area where our particles will fly and use that as an alpha matte. When I'm now soloing this, you can see that the particles are only flying where our matte is. But let's just duplicate the simple choker, and the more often I'm duplicating this, the more stretched out the particles will fly. Now let's watch this. Maybe what we can do is just pre-compose our matte and go in there and just stretch it out, because then our particles will also fly higher. So maybe we decrease the visibility of our particles a little bit and maybe blur them a little bit with a Gaussian blur. Okay, basically we are done. Let's just do a little bit of fine tweaking here. What we can do next is take the bottom and make this a smoke layer and bring it above the fire look, maybe even above the fire shape, and get rid of the mask that we had here. And now we can just blur that with a Gaussian blur. And maybe change the fractal type to something like strings, so that we get the small wisps of smoke. Now I want to just bring out the source again, or maybe just the input, bring it beneath everything, and I'm just bringing this to the same position. And let's just work on that look a little bit. So because the vector blur just shrinks everything down, I'm trying to already make this bigger again with the choker effect. And I'm bringing this on top of the fire and also blur this a little bit. So in this way we create something like just, so this is without and this is with. Now we just have something like a glowing material maybe for our letter, which really helps sell this. You could again mask out a part of this and feather it so the material kind of gets hotter as closer it is to the fire. And now the rest of the fire look is really up to you. What I did with my example was I created another adjustment layer, called this blue, and just tinted parts of this blue where it hits our source. And I did that with a hue and saturation. And just shift that over. So this is the source color, and I want it to be red over here, the blue over here. And you can do that visually, so the blue is getting closer to the red. And then I'm again just masking this out and feather it a lot. Also I'm setting this to color, and what I have now is a really nice organic looking burning O. But as we have set up all of this in a super procedural way, I can bring in whatever I want into my source composition, and this will automatically update. So let me quickly show you that as a last step. So back in my input layer, I can just hide this, and let's create like a polystar. Let's make this with no fill. So I'm just disabling the fill. Let's give the stroke a color. Let's make it white. And let's just bring up the stroke width. And then I want to have this like rotating. Now it's important to define what will be burning. So it would be nice if two of those edges would burn at the same time. So I'm just scaling this up. Now this part should burn. And maybe let's make the stroke a bit thinner. So I'm just making this smaller until we have the same size like our O, and just bringing this to that position. We now have something like this going on. So this is what our star looks like when we make a quick RAM preview. And isn't this really beautiful? You can see wherever the star hits our guideline, it starts burning and smoke is coming out of that part. It's tinting bluish and we have small sparks flying around there. And as I told you, everything is set up in a procedural way. So you can always just go back into our input and maybe you want to leave a message, like a quick hi. And back in our main comp, you have a burning hi. And the sparks are following, the small smoke wisps are following the letters. Really nice. And of course, you can take this as a starting point, tweak whatever you want. You can also bring the letters out once more, bring them to the front if you don't like that heat effect that's going on here. Maybe I would just bring out another adjustment layer and desaturate all of this. Or maybe just the red tones. And this is also the end of the tutorial. So I really hope that you learned something here, and if so, please feel free to subscribe to my channel, because I really love doing tutorials, and the more subscribers I have, the more fun it is. And just see this tutorial as a workflow tutorial. So think about possibilities where you can really create an input composition, bring something in there and build from there. And later on you can just switch it out and create really awesome looks within seconds. And now it's just time for you to play with some fire within After Effects.